Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today we're in Texas, the scene of a lot of major running and where one of our Western Pennsylvania runners now lives. He described himself when he heard of the podcast as, hey, you got to interview some of us back of the pack runners, but he's hardly back of the pack. He was number one runner on the team at IUP in the fall of 1976, but that's not where he did all his running at university. So there's a lot of story there. Welcome today on the podcast, somebody like many of the runners of the era, known by his nickname. It's Sparky, Paul Martin. Welcome.
Hi, Matt. Good to talk to you.
All right. I call you Sparky because that's how I always knew you, but it's Paul Martin. Let's introduce you to everyone by your origin story as a competitive athlete. When, where, and how did you get into competitive athletics or competitive running?
To be honest, did any kind of athletic stuff just to get out of the fields. We had a small 40-acre farm and we did everything by hand. And when I grew up, we were extremely poor. If we didn't raise it, we didn't have food to eat. We worked those fields all by hand. My dad, in his younger days, did like sports. So when we could go out and do some sports, they'd try and get us time to do that. We didn't have anything really in elementary. So in 7th, 8th grade, I went out for the football team. Of course, didn't play, but I was out, kept me out of the field. I played basketball. And in the spring, we had nothing. They didn't have a junior high track team. So we didn't do anything. And of course, spring was the big time for us to be planting stuff in the fields. So I spent most of my spring doing that. And I wasn't really that good, but it gave me some social time because we lived back pretty far off the road. Nobody was back there my age. If I wanted to go play with friends, I had to go out about a mile out the dirt road to where there were some people who were my age. I spent most of my time trying to do that. I actually liked winter the most back then because in the winter, we didn't have anything to do but chop wood and keep wood for the wood stove and do chores. But I could go down to the creek not too far away and we could ice skate. So that was my indoctrination and why I did sports when I was a little bit younger.
Let's just make this clear. We're not talking about the 1800s. This is the 1970s. And what town was that?
Now, here's what's funny. It was 35 miles out of downtown Pittsburgh, but it was a little village. I lived, and you talk about being on the other side of the tracks. It was called Unionville. We were on the other side of the creek. There were about 10 homes over on the other side of the creek. And if we wanted to go over and play with the other people in the bigger part of Unionville, we had to get across that creek. So many winters and other times you take your shoes off and walk across the creek so they wouldn't get all wet and put them back on so we could go over there and play. Because there was no bridges, no roads. In order to get to the road is about one of those, you can't get there from here. So we'd walk maybe over 2 miles to get to the other side of the creek. I know.
I'm just gonna say one more time. This is the 1970s. Okay. Or late 60s and early 70s.
We took the outhouse after my mother died in 2012. We removed the outhouse. I have the wood cooking stove that we used to cook with. Now, did we have electric? Yes, when we could afford it. Did we have plumbing? Yes. But if you don't have electric, we had a spring and the pump had to pump it out. So when we didn't have electric, we actually went out and opened the lid to the spring and dipped the water out and brought it in. We used it on the wood cook stove and took baths. Never had a shower. There were 7 kids. I had 8. My oldest brother passed away as a baby. There was 8 of us living in a probably 1,100 square foot, 3-bedroom house with 1 bath. We didn't have gas or oil. We had an old, big, huge monster of a wood furnace in the basement that gravity fed the heat up. So in the winter, if you were the far side away from that heater, it got a little bit cold in winter and you had to stoke the stove. I know people don't quite So when I say I understand what it is to not have money and stuff, I really grew up that way. Even though we were only 35 miles out of Pittsburgh, I'd never been to Pittsburgh till I was in high school.
Wow. When was the first time you ran a race?
First time I actually saw one in person, as I said, we had electric on and off and TV once in a while. It was over the air, wasn't cable. I do remember seeing some of the Olympics. First race I ever witnessed myself was my best friend was a year older than me. And in ninth grade, he lettered 4 years in track and was a starter. Back then, you couldn't play football or basketball in ninth grade. So he was a really good athlete and he was on the team and he actually lettered as a freshman, the only freshman letter. One day we went and watched a track meet. It was right after school. And that was the first time I ever saw one. And I said, if he can do it, maybe I'll go out next year as ninth grade. So first time I ever ran was in ninth grade.
And how'd you do?
I took fourth. The first 3 meets, I was running the mile. I knew I wasn't much of a sprinter. But back then, you could do different events, and I didn't want to run. Tried every event I possibly could. I tried long jumping. I tried high jumping. I tried hurdles. I even took the pole vault one time and went up, gone about 5 feet off the ground, came back down. It was just this little black top runway. And we actually had some metal pole vaults, and that's the one I picked up. And I went up about 5 feet, came straight down, and my knee, I hit that black top and it took height off my knees and my elbows. And the coach came over and said, if you ever pick one of these up again, I'll wrap it around your neck. Last time I tried that, I had to migrate to the distance. And so the first 4 meets, I remember vividly, I took fourth place in the mile. I ran maybe 5:05 or something like that. It wasn't real fast. And we weren't a really good conference. We had a couple decent. So that was my first racing per se.
And what did you think about it? How did that sport rack up with you for sports that you were participating in? How did you feel about your performance?
I felt pretty good. And that was the first sport I had done where it was individual. Basketball, you had to have a team. You can be the best person in the world, but your team stinks. Same thing with football. You also have to look at size matters more in football and basketball in most cases, or really fast. Distance runner doesn't help you much in football and or basketball other than your endurance. This is the first sport where it was really just me and everybody else. And you didn't have to worry about the team. And as I say, it was something where the coach couldn't tie you, even if you were like, maybe I should have been playing a little bit, but I wasn't. Why? A lot of different reasons can make you not play, even though if you're pretty much equal, but it's one-on-one in that. So I enjoyed it.
What happened during the rest of your time in high school? What was the quality of the coaching and your improvement?
I had really bad distance coaching. They were good coaches. They were field coaches. What happened after that fourth meet that I took fourth, I actually came home and my mother said, how did you do? I said, I finished fourth. And remember, it's a springtime. We need to get plants in the ground. And she said, if you can't do better than that, if you can't place, she knew top three was placing. She said, then I really need you here helping us. So next day I went up to the coach and I said, Coach, I think I can run longer and run about the same pace in the 2 mile. And I'm not doing as well as I want to. And he was like, okay. So he just switched the second. We had a second and third runner in the 2 mile. And he said, I'll just switch you guys. And they were happy because remember back then, if you ran the 2 mile, that was it. You couldn't run anything else. So I ran and I took second place. I came home and said, I took second place, Mom. And she shut up about me and she didn't say anything more. But then that
Wow.
restricted me to the 2 mile. And in order to let her, though, you had to have so many points or earn a medal, top 6 at the conference. So I ended up finished fourth in the conference and you had to have 15 points to get a letter. And I had exactly 15 points before the conference meet. So I was getting a letter and that made me I guess, really enjoy it because I was finally successful in something.
Did you think of yourself as a runner then?
Not really. And that's how I went to college was different than most people, but the coaching was good guys. But I do remember vividly my junior year and my senior year, I tried to run a little bit extra, run some distance. And my coach came up and said, look, you don't need to run more than a half mile to do well in the 2 mile. That's why you're not getting better. Because I was my senior year in the morning before anybody would get up, I was running 2 out and 2 back. And nobody knew about that. And I was doing that most of the spring until one kid who did graduate with me lived out along that route. And he happened to look out the window and saw me. And he told somebody who told the coach. And the coach came to me and said, have you been running in the morning? I said, yeah. And he said, that's why you haven't improved enough. And I didn't know any better. I literally knew nothing about running other than you just went out and did it.
That's a fantastic coaching strategy story. I don't know if that's in any books, but
Yeah.
catch your runners
He's good.
running in the morning and tell them to stop. All right.
Yes. And then I found out later for me, I would not improve that much. And then all of a sudden I have a nice drop in college. And it was the same thing there. I think I missed my opportunity to have that drop because I only ran 10 minutes and 10 seconds for the 2 mile my senior year.
Okay. Let's talk about going to college. Had other people in your family, other siblings gone to college? And when did you say, okay, I'm going to go to college? And how did you pick where you went?
None of my siblings went to college. I was the only one that graduated from college. My older brothers went in the service right away. My oldest brother, he was 8.5 years older than me. My youngest sister is 8.5 years younger than me. I was right in the middle age spots, a big gap. I decided I was going to go in the service. I really had never thought about going to college much. I knew about it. Some of my friends were going, but as I said, I either worked in the fields or my junior year, my brother came home from the military and got a job. And actually, he was a manager of a gas station and he hired me to work. So I worked part time there. And so I worked my junior and senior year at the gas station. And of course, was influenced a lot by him, both my brothers being in the service and my uncles were in the service. As far as going to college, I really didn't plan on it. I was going to the military. I remember junior year, actually for IUP, my coach handed us a pamphlet and said, hey, here's a pamphlet and it had Coach Sutton on it. And then it was a pamphlet about IUP. And of course, I paid no attention to it. And in my senior year, I hadn't told my mother, my father, I had told no one, none of my friends. I was just decided that's what I'm going to do. I also knew, though, if you wanted to go visit some colleges, you could get out of school. And I was a okay student. I didn't put a lot of effort into it because I figured I'm going into service. And I was a D- student. So I went to 3 or 4 schools to visit friends that were in college, just go there and see them for the day. But I did get pamphlet for East Stroudsburg. Dr. DeShriver, Coach DeShriver, he was Pete Heason's coach. Nice enough guy. So me and another of my classmates drove up to East Stroudsburg one day and hung out and visited him and then went home. Then I'm walking through the school and the guidance counselor had graduated with my oldest brother and he was back as a guidance counselor and families knew each other. And he said to me, he said, hey, I got a call from a coach who wants to talk to you. And he said, coach, and he's recruiting for Clarion University, Clarion State College then. He said, I told him you probably wouldn't have any trouble talking to him about going there. I said, yeah, that's fine. What am I going to tell him? Because I'm putting up a facade about going to school maybe. Before that, I never thought I could run. I wasn't that good. Cross country, I wasn't very good at all cross country. I was like, if I'd come to a hill, I'd basically walk it. I didn't train. That's what's funny about some of the stories we'll get to when we go to college, but we didn't train. In track season, if it rained, we didn't go outside. We play around inside. And a lot of the guys on the team played handball outside. That was their practice. But we always had good competitive teams for our conference. We had a lot of good athletes. One person finished second in the state in the javelin. So we always had some good competitors. but I wasn't going to school. So I was at home, Clarion recruiter. He was the assistant basketball coach. And then he also helped recruit for track. That was part of his job. He didn't coach, but he recruited. The only reason he called me was because Beaver County had a powerhouse basketball and really good in football. We had 4 state champs and 2 runners up in the small class back then. It's the equivalent of double A now. But so we had phenomenal basketball. So he was always looking, and I wasn't great, but I got some good write-ups in the local paper. And he saw my name and he said, I got to recruit somebody. So he contacted me. This is the story I never told my mother till she probably was in her 70s. So 2 days before I'm going up to Clarion to visit, I'm going by myself. My mother comes up and says, you've been going to these colleges, and your dad and I decided we'd like to go with you and see one of these colleges. And I'm like, you got to understand my mother. She is a strong hillbilly woman. And it was like telling her no, I would get knocked out. So I said, and yeah, my mother didn't spank you. She took you to the woodshed, but she didn't do it often. That's why you didn't want it. So I wouldn't tell her no. So I said, okay. So we all went up there and had a very nice visit, met with the coach, met with one of the sprinters, took us down to the track, and we come back and he says, I have an appointment at the admissions office because we're going to go there. They'll go over the paperwork with you and give the paperwork. I'm like, okay. So we go there, and the admissions officer goes over this stuff and he gets done. He said, now, when you make your decision about what college you want to go to, fill this paperwork out. It's addressed, come right back to me. You're guaranteed entry. We already know your grades and your SATs. We have a couple spots for recruiting athletes. You have one. Send it back to me and you'll be in. And my mother looks at him and says, what do you mean when he makes his mind up? That's why we're here. He's already made up his mind. He's going here. Wow. Now, I turned 18 about a week before that. And I'm sitting there hyperventilating. I'm serious. I'm like, what do you mean? I kid you not. I said, if I embarrass my mother by saying, Mom, I'm not going to college, I'm going to service right here, this man will witness a young, because I wasn't big, it's still not that big. I said, I'm a young man getting knocked out. And understand, he didn't knock my mother because my dad was 6'4", about 240. My dad was a big man. I looked at him and I'm shaking, and he said, is that right? And I said, yes. He filled the paperwork out. I signed, and I was in college.
Wow, that's a brilliant story. Wow.
So
Did you know anybody at Clarion? Is that one of the places you visited, had friends?
no, I knew nobody. I just went there because I could get out of school. It was a little bit, wow, somebody's actually interested in me to run. I had contacted Coach Schreiber from East Stroudsburg only because it sounded pretty interesting. And I did get accepted there, but I didn't go because I wasn't planning on going. But I did fill the paperwork out again because my mother said, if you filled out the paperwork for any of these colleges, don't you have to do an application or something? I said, I better really keep this facade up and at least apply to a college. So that was my way I got into college.
What happened then? What was the transition like? Equipment, coaching, academics, everything. How'd you adjust to life on campus?
To this day, I am very grateful that I went to Clarion instead of like IUP or anywhere else, because Clarion was not a very strong team at that point.
All right. So Clarion was a perfect fit for you to start. How was your adjustment? Life away from home, eating in cafeteria, equipment, coaching, who knew what running was about?
I knew nothing about running. When the season was over, our last conference meet, and I only made it to district my senior year. I made it to district one time in my life. Ran one conference meet in cross country, never went any further than that. When the season ended, that was the last day I took any steps, other than I finally said, I got to run a little bit more. I'm running the 2 mile. And that's all I was allowed to run, because that was a mistake. After I finished second on the team in the 2 mile, I always did very well. and you could only run that in high school. So I did want to try to run something else, but he said, I have no other 2 milers. That's all you're running, and that's all you're allowed. But if it was bad weather, we didn't run. If it was, cold out, all those reasons.
Yeah.
So that carries over. I'm a week before I go up to Clarion, my mother says to me, you're going up there to run and you haven't ran a step all summer. And I said, I never ran any other summer either. And I said, yeah. I said, I'm not any good in cross country anyway. So I'll try and get in shape for track. A week later, go up to school, had got no contact, knew nobody, went to the wrong dorms. It took us hours to find where I was supposed to go in there, knew nobody, met my roommate. I go up and walk to the gym and look all over the gymnasium, look for signs. And I find a sign that says cross country meeting the next day in the evening. Said, okay. Showed up that day. It still hadn't met anybody. Actually, it was the morning of, so it was Monday. That Monday, after we went in the weekend, went up to eat in the morning, talk about eating, and that was fine. That was food and all you wanted. And that was great. I didn't have to cook it, didn't have to raise it. And yeah, we butchered all of our own animals. So I've butchered many animals, all kinds, raised many animals. So yeah, eating in the dorm or eating in the cow hall wasn't a problem. But I do remember going into the cafeteria and looking around, and almost every table has a lot of people except one. And there's one person. I said, I'll go over and sit down on that one, sit down. That was the first person I ever met. And he introduces himself. His name is Richard Martin. I said, hey, what's the chance of this? And I started laughing. He said, what's so funny? I said, well, my name's Paul Martin. And he says, oh, he said, you aren't from Freedom High School. I said, yeah. I said, you aren't from New Brighton. So one time we ran New Brighton, and Freedom always ran. He ran the 800. And I remember looking at it, seeing R. Martin there. I said, I wonder if I know. That was it. I never saw it again because he was like their third runner. So I didn't get to talk to him, didn't track him down, but then he's the first person I meet. So I said, you want to go off for the cross country teams? And he was in the same dorm as me. So we said, okay, we'll go. So the next day we jogged down there, and all the guys are setting up on the stadium bleachers, and we were jogging up, and we walk up there and they're looking at me. And the first question was the guy Joe Nichols. And if it wasn't for my team at Clarion and at IUP, I probably wouldn't have been a very good runner at all. And I probably wouldn't have done very well in school. Those guys just kept me motivated and doing any work for me, but they just gave me a lot of support. And I had support at home, but not like other people had. My mother only graduated from 8th grade. So it wasn't like I could get a lot of help from her. Now, my dad did graduate from a college. My dad was a lot older. My dad was born in 1907. So he was older than most people's grandparents, like my age. So I had a different mentality. First time in 5th grade, when I bring back modern math, what's that? So, it was English. Okay. If it was some biology, when it came to math, he knew multiply, divide, and subtract.
How about those workouts then? You hadn't run all summer. How was the adjustment? Did you get good equipment and the coaches planned the workouts? Was that a different level of coaching than you had ever had?
Yes. All of that. Joe looked at me, Joe Nichols. He ended up being an All-American in the marathon from Clarion. He looked at me and he said, do you run in those shoes? And I said, yes, they're the only shoes I own. My senior year, they decided to have a county track championship, and it included AA and AAA. So big schools, everybody. And it was on an IUP type track back then, the old macadam at Geneva College. And we had spikes. I remember Mark Muggleton was saying about he ran in Converse, the old Chuck Taylors. That was me. I was on the basketball team and they gave us shoes and we got to keep them. That was the only shoes I had to wear in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade was those Converse because they let you keep, and it would last me till the next year and I'd get a pair. I had those. And I said, I can't run in these. So I went down to I don't even know what shoe store it was. And there was a pair on sale for $5 that you shouldn't walk in, let alone run it. And I bought them and I ran that one race in them. That's all I had. So I took them and I went down there. Then I'm serious. Joe said, you running those things? I said, yes. He just shook his head. So that was my first experience and they treated us fine. The coach showed up and he said, all right, talked about blah, 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 the normal stuff. And all the other guys would tell me how much training they did, all the upperclassmen. And I'm thinking, I haven't ran one step since the district meet. That was in May. And it's a brand new coach, Bill English. He had helped a little bit the year before. The head coach left, so he took over. He was a really good runner at Lock Haven. So he said, well, it's a 2-week course there at Clarion at that time, and a little extra. The upperclassmen would take you freshmen, because we had 5 or 6 freshmen on the team. They'll take you, you'll do that one loop today, so you know what the course looks like. And then tomorrow we're going to run it for time. I'm too dumb to think about, oh, it's only a little bit over 5 miles. I'm not thinking, what's 5 miles? So we jogged it. And while we're jogging, they're asking us questions. And then one freshman, I ran this many miles, this one, and they come to me. Now, the other thing that Joe said is he said, you were running those shoes? And I said, yes. And then his next third question was, didn't they recruit you to run here? And I said, yes. And he looks at me because I had this old t-shirt, only thing I had, and I had these shorts that you shouldn't wear, but that's the only thing I had to wear. I'm telling them the stuff and they said, how much did you run this summer? I said, this is the first time I've ran since the middle of May. And they looked at me and they said, are you serious? I said, yeah. So they were like rolling their eyes. I remember Mark Muggleton telling you about going up to Edinburgh and running that first 13-mile workout. Thank goodness I didn't run that much. I only ran 5, a little bit over. Next day we lined up and we run. And I'm running, and I just go out slow. And then kept working my way up. And I'm coming around and I'm counting the people. And I know there's 7 on a varsity team. And I'm counting. And I'm in 7th place. And I'm looking around. And there's nobody close to me. So I finish in 7th. And I'm thinking, I'm on the varsity team. And we go over and lay down. And I ran, I don't know, under 30 minutes. I'd never ran a race, never ran that far in my life. Never ran more than the 4 miles I was running on my own when the coach told me not to do it. So I laid there and the coach was all excited. He was like, hey, this is really good. We got 3 freshmen and 4 upperclassmen, 1 senior. So we got a good nucleus, and my time wasn't that good, but it was like, I don't know, 29:50. And he said, so all of you will start running together tomorrow and you'll do 10 miles. I picked my head up and I said, Coach, that's the first time I've ran since May. I said, I can't run 10 miles. I said, I don't know if I can run 5 miles again. By then I was so bad. It was like, I said, Nick Morris was coming in, Matt. The upperclassmen were starting to giggle a little bit because the coaches, he had a tendency to react a certain way every time. He was like frustrated and he was reacting that way. I didn't know him. That's the second time I'd ever met him. And he said, okay, you'll start a couple miles tomorrow. So that was my wake up to running in college. The next day, I couldn't get out of bed. Mark talked about that. I literally was sick. My roommate was like, do you need any help? I had an 8 o'clock class. I rolled out of bed, went down to the shower and turned on the hot water to loosen me up. I thought I was going to throw up. Didn't eat supper the night before because I was hurting so bad already. And I literally, where the campus was on the hill, I had to go up the hills to get to the dining hall. And I literally had to take my hands and grab my pants to pick my leg up.
This is great.
I went to practice that night. And by then I loosened up some and I could walk. There was a group of about 10 of us. We ran about 2 miles and I came back and he had me run with that group for the first week. And next week, I was doing better. So he said, all right, I'm going to move you up a little bit. So I went up to about 4 miles a day. And about halfway through that week, it rained. And I literally said, thank goodness, because my roommate, he wasn't running. He was telling me, why are you putting yourself through this agony? Because I was going to bed as soon as I got back to the dorm, and I would sleep until 6 o'clock. And then I'd get up and take a half hour just to get moving because I was still so sore. And I was sick. And he said to me, why are you putting yourself through this? And to be honest, I said, I have nothing else to go back to. I go back, I can work at my brother's gas station, pump gas for minimum wage. And I said, but I have nothing back there to go. So I have nothing else to do but try and be successful in this. And it rained. I was in bed sleeping, and there's a pounding on my door. And I go over to the door and open it up, and all the guys are standing and they're wet. And they said, where are you at? And I said, it's raining. And they said, what do you mean it's raining? I said, I never trained before in my life in the rain. And they said, this is college, boy. So get your clothes on. So I put the clothes on and I ran. At the end of that week, we had a second time trial. Well, back to training. So I'm running 4 miles a day and I'm not hurting quite so bad. So we run it again, same group of people. And I lowered my time by 2 minutes and I finished fourth. And I ran 27.4 for 5 miles. The coach said, oh, this is really great. Look at that time. And you finished fourth. So I'm moving you up with the other guys. So they moved me up to the regular big guys, and they were doing 7 to 10 miles a day, or maybe even more. And that was a huge adjustment because I can remember getting done and back to every night. I'm going to sleep at 7, 8 o'clock and sleep until the next morning. I'm still wearing those shoes. I'm not thinking anything of it. It's, hey, it's the only thing I got. You're young. My body is still in half decent shape. We had our first meet. Coach was pretty excited about it. It's against IUP and Mansfield. He said, you guys are ready. You had a pretty good time. Paul, you getting better. Everybody's getting a little better. So IUP shows up with their horde of guys. And I remember Donnie Slusser, didn't know him, but I know who he was. And they're telling me the upperclassmen and Uncle Will, he just passed away. I remember, Bill was at Bill Hampton. And they're warming up and I'm looking at them and I'm saying, man, they look pretty good. So we run our first meet and competition. I finished 14th. IUP took the first 10, 1 through 10. And then it was my Jerry Burke. And then there was a guy from Mansfield. And then Doug Brown, who was my teammate, and me. I dropped my time another minute and Doug had to out sprint me. So that's why I'm saying if I'd have gone to an IUP, I'd have never been, because they had 10 guys and it wasn't like I was close to their 10th guy.
What did you race in? Did you get another pair of shoes to run the race in?
No, those were my same shoes.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. Coach is pretty happy though, because we all got times. And he said, listen, IUP is really good. And they did. They went on and finished, I think at NAI, they were 4th or 5th, 6th, somewhere in there at nationals. So they had a good, solid team and they won the conference and won the district and won everything. So we kept training. This is where, if it wasn't for my 5 guys, Jimmy Newkirk, he's a 800 guy for Clarion that just missed making All-American in the 800 at nationals when they had a slippery rock back in, what was that, 76. He ran a lot against Muggle. Doug Brown, very good. My sophomore year at Clarion, he was second in the mile run behind a guy, Roach from Edinburgh. They were good runners. Jimmy Newkirk, I talked him into coming out from the team. He was in the dorm right beside us, and I got to talk to him. He had a 49, 440 back then. So we got him to go out. And that's why it was me. Those guys kept me going because there were a lot of times that I wanted to drop out of school. And school was rough for me. What was rough about school was I was so tired. I really had a limited studying, and halfway through the semester, we got the grades and I got warning in all 4 classes. I only had 4 classes. So I had 14 credits, 2 more 4-credit courses. And I got warnings that I was going to flunk all 4 of them. The coach got it and he was not happy. He said, why didn't you tell me? I could have got you tutoring. And I remember telling him, look, coach, if I can't make it on my own, I don't want it. So I did bring him up. I ended up with 2 Bs and 2C after I got used to training. It was such a big body shock. I was tired all the time. The second meet, we go to Lock Haven, run at Lock Haven. Lock Haven had a couple good runners then. So I think we maybe lost, but not by a lot. And I get done and I feel something in my shoes. And I look down, I take my shoes off, and both socks are soaked in blood. My toes nails had burst off open. I had 3 of my toes. They were bleeding from these shoes because, as I said, you couldn't even been walking in them. When the coach saw that, he said, "Let me see your shoes." And he texted me, he said, "You've been running in these?" I said, "Yeah, they're the only things I have." And he said, "You rest those feet tomorrow, Sunday." He said, "Monday, before practice, drove down to Brookville, which was 10 miles away. They had a sporting goods store. He bought me a pair. College had an account there. He got me a pair of real shoes, and I put them on. And I was like, is this what real running shoes are supposed to feel like? A good pair of Adidas running shoes. I had never had a pair of shoes like this. I mean, they were cushioned, they had arch support, and I ran all my races in them the rest of the year, except when we could use spikes. The college did have some spikes that we could use. The training then went just like that, where I moved up with the big guys and we did probably the normal where you were doing distance running. Probably towards the second half of the season, I started to do a little bit of running in the morning with Joe. Remember, a lot of the 70s was LSD. What's that? Long, slow distance.
Slow distance. Yeah.
You know what? I had to slow down, but not the long and not the distance. I had neither one. I didn't have the L and the D, but I was really good at that S. And maybe I know until I went to IUP and had Coach Fry's plan, I realized later in life that I needed a lot better quality and a lot less slow stuff, and maybe not quite as long. I remember some of the other runners talked about 70, 80 miles a week. Joe was 100+ guy, and he's great for me because he was the one that every day he was out there and he'd drag you along, and I needed that because when I was by myself, I had a tendency not to really run because of bad habits. It was very hard for me. And then just the whole situation at my home where I grew up, when I'd go home there, really tough. My first meet ever, I was 14 and I just kept training. And again, I'd like to say I never really thought about running, never had a strategy. I just went out and ran and knew that I couldn't go out too fast. If I did, I would fall apart later. So I was 14th the first meet, went to the district meet, pretty good. I had moved up and was actually challenging our first and second runner by the end of the season. Went to the district meet there at IUP and finished 14th at the district meet. And only 6 guys from IUP beat me. I was thrilled about that. I actually beat one of their top 7 guys at that meet. So I said, I improved quite a bit. My time dropped. I think I was low 26s at that meet. And then we went to Edinburgh and ran at Edinburgh in the state conference. And our best runner, Jerry, had to outkick me, come down. He finished 13th. I finished 14th. And I think our times were low 26s there at the Edinburgh course.
Let's talk about okay. So that's in your first year. What'd you do in the summers? Did you go back home at the end of
Yes.
and did you
Yeah,
train in the summer then?
Yeah, and I had a lousy track season that year. Not really. It was just different. It was a 3 mile, didn't run the mile or anything shorter. Maybe I should have ran that. Maybe I had more positive results, but I ran basically the same pace for 3 miles that I ran 6. So the season ended. We went to the conference track meet and I said, let me try the 6 mile. They were running the 6 mile because Joe was a good 6 miler guy. He said, well, you're going to get dizzy running that. It's 24 laps around there. And I said, I have a tendency to run a decent pace and just not be able to run fast. So he was a school record holder. And again, Clarion wasn't a powerhouse, but I ran just over 31 minutes for the 6 miles. And I was encouraged from that. I said, that's pretty good. That's as fast as I was running the 3 mile. So yes, that summer I did run an amazing and high mileage of 5 miles a day. So I had moved up to 35 miles and I was pretty happy with that, even though it's not very much. And went back and the first meet time trial, and we did the same thing. First day, brought the freshmen in. We did just one loop of it. And next day we ran the time trial and I ended up winning the time trial and I ran faster than what I ran the year before. But the difference was I went out hard and everybody was like, who's this guy? I was much stronger and had a pretty good cross country season. Got some speed work because I didn't do any speed work in the summer. Really just going out and running 5 miles. And it was probably slow, 5:30 to 6 minute pace at best. Again, same kind of things had went to, and here's the story. There were many interactions with other runners. Kim Burke was a freshman, and my senior year in high school went to an invitation, and I met Kim just out of talking. Hey, we're running the same events. We start talking and found out that he lived in the community where my brother's gas station was. And he'd come down and visit me and we'd talk about it. And I was telling him about my freshman year and Kim was pretty good runner. And he said, he's going to IUP. I said, oh, we'll be running against each other. So I had a little bit of an in with IUP guys as far as that goes. When we'd run against them and stuff, it just made a little bit more camaraderie. And they talk about Edinburgh. So I guess the camaraderie was we all were after Edinburgh because they were so good. It wasn't that we didn't like them. It was just they were always so good. So all the other teams were always trying to beat them. And we were always encouraging each other to do well just to try and beat Edinburgh. But our first meet my sophomore year was at Edinburgh. Took us around the course. And the person who took us around the course was Kevin Foley. He was a freshman, but he wasn't running. If you remember what he said in his podcast, he first came in, he struggled with some injuries a lot of his years, just nagging stuff. And so I remember talking to him. He probably wouldn't remember this because it was nothing more than something he had to do, take around the team that was there. I remember running that race and went out hard. All year, my sophomore year, I went up the reverse. I would go out really hard and then die, but I would fight it, figuring I might get stronger. Again, the training was, we did a lot of repeats, which a lot of people did, but they were too slow and we had too much rest in between. We went to IUP, we did them harder with less rest. So we simulated your training. But Joe was always the guy there that was leading us, pushing us and getting us up and getting us going. And Jerry was a good runner. Jerry Burke was one of my roommates my junior year when I got injured at Clarion and decided to transfer. Three of us, Doug Brown, Jerry, and I, roomed together.
Did you decide to transfer? What was that about?
The transfer was, I lost confidence in the coach. My sophomore year, we ran the first meet at Edinburgh and I ran a 25:55. So that's 20 seconds faster than I ever ran in my life. And I took sixth. Edinburgh put 5 guys in front of me. It was like a little disheartening. And my other 2 guys on the team were top 10. So we had a decent 3, but we were a little shallow as far as we didn't have a lot of depth. But there was Edinburgh. They put 5 guys in front of us. And I said, I ran 20 seconds faster. I didn't have speed work. Joe always talked about long, slow distance. And so we did a lot of that. We go out for some 10-mile runs. We didn't do a lot of doubles, but we go out for 10, 12-mile runs, but they were not really that hard. And that's why when I listened to Coach Watts and he's talking about how they ran, I said, it probably figures. But then our coach was really a part-time coach and he taught at a high school. So he was very limited about how much interaction he'd get there. And so he didn't have the kind of one-on-one that you have when you're actually a full-time employee of university. And I think that hurt us. We weren't a powerhouse to begin with, but we trained hard. long, slow distance, kept getting better. IUP came up and we actually beat them the first three. That's a story with Tom McGuire. IUP showed up and we ran our course and it was a scored as a dual meet. So if you take the first three, you automatically win. Jerry, Doug, and I are running, and we're about 50 yards in front of Tom McGuire, and Coach Sutton goes by, and he's furious. We had about 3/4 of a mile to go, and he goes by and some looks could kill. He was not happy because IDP had the next 10 runners, but we had those first three. He got them 14 and said, "You don't catch them, we're going to automatically lose." So Tom worked hard, but he didn't quite catch us because we made sure that we knew that was the only way we were going to beat them. So we kept getting better. And then we went to the district meet was at Edinburgh. And I remember saying, okay, I ran here meet of the year and went out like a maniac and died. I'm not going to do that this time. But the team that was running there was a little bit different. Kevin was on the team at that point. And Lou Champney, he was there. I think he only went for 1 year and then he left the team or whatever reason. But I had heard their times. And some of them ran low 9 minutes in high school. And here I am thinking, I never broke 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, these guys are a minute in front of me for 2 miles. Long and short of it, I just ran a controlled race and kept moving up to 3 mile. A couple of us were there and we made a turn where you could see. And I looked behind me and I said, if I slow down at all, I'm not going to do as well as I did last year. I turned around and Lou took off and Lou Tammy took off from Edinburgh and I went with him and we just kept going. And when we came around to the finish, I'm turning around. I had no speed at the end and I was maybe 400 or 500 yards straight away and he took off and I ended up second. And I ran 25:08. So I had dropped my time almost 50 seconds. Kevin was third behind, 5-6 seconds behind. So that had a great season. Track had a really good season. I finished second in the conference behind Jeff Bradley and ran under 30 minutes for 6 miles. So I was pretty excited and I went home and I actually ran that summer 8 miles a day. So that was a lot for me. And I was doing some quality. So I came back to school my junior year, pretty excited. We did the same thing. Warm up. Going to run the time trial next day. I get up and I'm sick as a dog the next morning. So I stayed in bed throwing up. By mid-afternoon, I was feeling pretty good. I said, I want to go out and jog a little bit. Maybe I'll go down and watch the time trial. I got there just right before they were going to take off, and I was feeling a little bit better. And Coach said, you're going to run. And I said, Coach, I've been sick as a dog all day. I just jogged down here to get a little bit of running in. Jerry and Doug said, oh, we're not going to run today. The coach said he's not going to run us. And then he came up to me and said, I want you to run. And I said, Coach, I'm sick as a dog. And he said, no. I said, I'm the coach and I'm telling you to run. And so I ran and didn't warm up properly. I broke our course record by 30 seconds. And in the process, ripped my Achilles tendon. I just wasn't warmed up and it was a pretty hilly course. Jogging back to the apartment, I felt a twinge in my Achilles. And by the time I got back there, it was hurting pretty good. And I said, no big deal. Next day I got up and it was swelled up and I tried to jog and that was it. I kept trying to train that whole cross country season. The only meet I really ran was the conference meet. I think I finished in the 30s. And then I did the first track meet and ran over 5 minutes because I was hurting so bad. I was so disappointed that I said, if I ever want to run again, I have to get to a different coach.
Wow. And how did eligibility work? Did you use a season of eligibility even though you didn't race?
I didn't run track and then I transferred. So back then you had 5 years to get your 4 years. And since you had to set out a year to transfer. So I had to set out a year when I transferred. So in reality, even if I want to go back today, they'd give me that cross country season back. And I have 2 track seasons. I did not run track after my sophomore. So I still could go back and run at IUP. or anywhere. So coaching, it was good. I lost confidence in him because he did not listen to me when I told him that I was really sick. But if I wouldn't have had that kind of coaching, I'd have went to, say, the IUP program where they had so many people. I would have just said, I'm not running. They were too good, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to be successful. Now, it might have been different. People may have kept me in. For me, it's always been the team because I was never a real big front runner. I was competitive, but the team pulled me along, and the way they trained and the way they supported me, which was the big thing. The 70s was all about a lot of people starting to decide to run, and not necessarily as competition, but just running. For me, I was being able to be social, make some phenomenal friends who ended up making my life so much better and so much different than the life that I came from. Not that they were bad people I came from. It was just a different, I like to say, I was born in West Virginia, and they just picked up the hills of West Virginia and moved it to this little place at the end of the road.
How'd you pick IUP?
I was thinking about it. And at the conference meet in junior, I wasn't running because I was hurt. The coach couldn't go because he was a high school teacher and he couldn't get out. So he gave me all the scratch sheets and everything. And I sat in for the coach and did everything. Tom McGuire had known pretty well and had a relationship with him. And I was talking to him and I said, Tom, I think I need to transfer. An hour later, here he comes back dragging Coach Fry. He said, Coach, Martin said he wants to transfer. He's in business, so IUP has a big business. So, get him transferred. So Ed and I talked, and he said, okay. And I let him know, though, that summer I went into Officers Candidate School for the Marine. So I went down to Camp Quantico for 10 weeks. He said, so we got to get it done before that, because once I'm at that 10 weeks, I'm not transferring. When I come back, we only have a week before school starts. So it was a week before I was leaving that Saturday for camp. And I hadn't heard a thing from IUP. So I said, I'm just going to go back to Clarion, finish my year, and go back in the Marines after I do boot camp, Officers Candidate School. And on Tuesday, I got a phone call from Coach Sutton. And he said, are you still interested in transferring? I said, yeah, but I've got to leave Saturday. So he said, how can we do this? I said, I'll drive up, get my transcripts from Clarion, drive back down to meet you at noon. And I met him and Ed Fry, and we went into admissions and got it all done and had it all transferred. And then I went and I didn't train at all that summer. And then I started again at IUP, not really knowing anybody other than a few guys on the team, and wasn't eligible, but I did train. I had a lot of questions whether I'd make it. First meet of the year, I ran. They'd let everybody run. So I ran, and I dropped out at the 3-mile mark, and I think it was like 18:05. So
Wow.
I wasn't in very good shape. I was in pretty good shape from doing a lot of push-ups and sit-ups. I wasn't in very good running shape. And the big thing I realized was I had to stay away from home in order to keep distractions away. And I've done coaching since then and been an official for 30 some years in Pennsylvania and all of that. And I think a lot of our kids are in that same boat where they didn't have good coaching, where they didn't have that support for running, and they could have been a lot better. And I've coached a couple college teams. I coached in high school. When Bob Costello and I went back, got our masters, I started running again there, and back to everybody else helped me become a little bit better runner. And the same thing happened in the spring of 76. So in the next fall, I'd be eligible. I was in pretty good shape. We were running a couple really good workouts on the track, and then my knees started hurt. By the end of April, I literally could not walk on it. So I didn't know what to do. Nationals got over, and Coach Fry came to me. It was the middle of May, and he said, look, I'm going to take you to this guy that I go to. We're going to have you evaluated and see what's wrong with your knee. Went to this guy. that was an old gentleman, but Ed called him a naturalist. So basically, he was like a doctor, chiropractor combination. And he looked at me and he said, "Your hip's out of place." Ed was like,
Wow.
"Oh," he said, "Yeah, your hip's out of place. It's not taking the absorption, your shock from running. Your knee's taking all the pressure." He laid me down. He moved me around, put his hand on my hip and grabbed my knee. And he did something, but it was like a gun when that hip went back in. And it was one of those where it's hurts. As if you've got a back adjustment where it hurts, but then it feels really good. And he said, "Don't run anymore. I want you back here in 2 weeks and we'll let you know if it stayed in place." And he gave me some exercise to do, and I did, and went back in 2 weeks. And he said, "Hey, everything looks good." And I was feeling good, and the knee was no longer hurting. So I remember that was the end of May. And I had made the decision not to go back home. I stayed up at IUP and took a couple classes and then just trained. And
Were you living with the cross country house?
what happened was, like, first year up there, somebody graduated or left in December. Nobody else could come in, and I could get out of the lease. I moved into the cross country house, which helped me even more, meet more people, and also start to get acclimated to the IUP way of training, which was substantially different. But going back to the team, Kim Burke made me have a good season. They kept meticulous records that year because I knew this was it. This is my last season under the current circumstances. And I ran 2 races that summer. One was when I ran into Jeff Lester from Edinburgh. We were running at the Butler. It was a Butler, and it was sometime in July. I think it was the July 4th race, but it wasn't on July 4th. I think it was before the 4th. And we were running, and he caught up to me, and I finished with him. It was more of a workout for him, but I was really questioning whether I am going to be able to even make the team. We were probably running mid 5 minutes, but it wasn't an easy course, but he is running for a workout. And I was dying. It was like, and not thinking I was going to make it back, but just kept training. But from then till nationals, I averaged 13.8 miles every day. And even during the season, I'd go out and run after the races. I was doing doubles every day and running as hard as I could. And my legs were lead during many of our meets that senior year. But knowing that, okay, by the end of the season, I'll rest up. My goal, my hope is that the legs will respond after some rest. Kevin Foley talked about the fact that he was second at the conference meet behind Pete Heeson from East Stroudsburg. And then at nationals, Kevin was second. But at the conference meet, I'd done a double the day before that, and my legs were dead. And I remember saying, okay, I'm going to die no matter what. I'm going out. I led, that was a 2-loop course. And through the first loop, I actually led Kevin and Pete on purpose because I knew I was going to die no matter what. But I'm going to die fighting. And I think that really helped me because it was making me stronger. Because I remember fighting, and I remember watching Muggleton, Ladica, and I think Packard, because the other 3 had already gone by me, with Henry Winger and Foster. But I remember them going by me, but I held on as long as I could. I finished 11th. I remember that race well because I was warming up. I could barely pick my legs up. But I think it paid off because then the next week we went to nationals and I rested that week. And we finished 6th. And NCAA, we were the first team from the East Coast. It was in Missouri. That was the teams. Irvine won it with Cerna, Scott, and Hurst. They were in the top 3 runners.
They hold hands across the line that meet. It was one meet they did. I don't know if they did.
Yeah,
Division.
I think
They
it
also
was
ran.
that. Actually, from what I understand, they did back off because Cerna getting first place. And that was the first time a freshman had ever repeated because he had won it the year before. I ran okay. I finished 29th and ran 30-50. We had a 30-second gap there, 40. I was 30-50, and I think our 5th runner was 31-30. So even then, we were still having a pretty good gap the next week. And at NAIA, where Kevin was second, and that picture, I actually enlarged that picture that you have out there with him. I remember seeing Kevin up there at that exact spot at the top of that hill. You could see all the way. That was the race, unfortunately, where it's before the mile, maybe a couple hundred yards, somebody took my shoe off and I had to stop, put it back on. And it was tight, so tight. I tried to get it on the first time, wouldn't pop on. Tried a second. Finally, the third one, I got it to pop on. We had, I think, 360 or 90 runners in that race. So when a shoe came off, I thought about trying to finish. And I remember the course was really rough, not running rough. They had gone through that week through these fields and cut the weeds down. It had never been used before. So you had stubbles out there. And I said, it make my feet mince. I cannot run. It's not a nice manicured golf course. So I said, I have to put the shoe back. Time I got it back on, Matt, I'm looking left and right and people were jumping over the top of me. And I looked behind and there probably wasn't 30, 40 people behind me when I started running. And I said, I started jogging and I was like, it was so close. I was like, do I step off? And I said, this is my last race up. I said, no, I'm not stepping. So I kept running. I looked in front and I saw somebody from the conference up there. And I said, I'm going to beat that guy. So I caught him. And then I saw another person from the conference, caught them. And I looked a little further ahead and I saw Tim McVeigh and Ken Trilly on it. And I said, if I can catch them, I can help the team because that put me fifth. So I caught up to them and I said, come on, guys, let's go. And they said, nope, today's not our day. And that was the one thing on our team then that year. We had 4 guys that were pretty much in the top 5 every time. And then one of those other 3 guys, they would step up. And there were times Andy Fife, who you've interviewed, he actually set the course record on our course out there. And he ran like a phenomenal race. So one guy, every meet, one of those 3 would step up. It was like they'd look at each other and say, I ain't got it today. And the other one say, I don't think I got it either. And the guy said, then I'll do it. He looked at me and said, we don't have it today. Trilly had ran really well the week before. And Tim had ran the conference meet. And Andy ran that meet. So then I kept running and I was picking up speed. And I looked up and I said, I think that's my other 4 teammates. And I pulled up and it was, and I pulled up beside them. And that's where Dan mentioned that 5 of us were running abreast. I pulled up and we ran abreast. And one vivid thing I remember from that race was 3 of us went around these 2 teammates and the other 2 went the other way. And we closed back in front of them and kept running. And they said, there's 5 of them. I vividly remember that guy saying, there's 5 of them because they all had the exact same team. Jersey, I remember almost every aspect of that course. But at that point where that picture of heaven up there, I knew exactly where I was at that point. And I found, I think I enlarged it as much as I could. And I saw a uniform that matched us. And I counted the people back there and I knew about where I was. And I said, yep, because that was about the 3-mile mark or so, where that you came up that hill. But yeah, so I'm actually in that picture. Yeah.
Cool.
But I lost there because I told you I had to run a certain race. Always have. I just couldn't go too hard. And I ran somewhere around those 2 miles, that second, third mile, I ran about 9:40 to catch up. I was not in a position to be able to do that. I needed to have gone there and ran 5 minutes every mile. Those 2 threw me out. I didn't give up, but I ended up dropping back because I remember seeing Mark Muggleton finish 17th. Now he came on more of those last 2 miles, but I wasn't very far behind him. But there are a lot of people between us and you ran, a lot of people run. Those people up front don't come back a lot because they're there because of a reason, because they've trained. So I knew getting the top 25, that was done. So I ended up just running. And then actually Mark Mandel caught up to me. And then coming around, I said, I can't let this freshman beat you on the last meet ever. I'm going to run. So I ended up just placing a little bit in front of him. That's how we ended up All-American team. We had 5 guys with 15 seconds split. But
Nice.
yeah. And then I made the mistake talking about it's not a mistake. My dad had passed away. The IUP invitation, my mother came to watch it and had some family members. That was the only time anybody other than my dad had ever come to watch me run in my life. My mother had never seen me in any athletic thing. And we had made arrangements knowing my dad was getting ill that he might pass away, but we had it all set up because he wanted to come see me run one time in college. He never got to see me run. So my mother did come up and run and watch that. But I had planned on not going back over Christmas. I was going to stay up and train with Ed, but I was going to go home for one day. We still had no money. My dad had died. I went to college. I got scholarships and stuff, not from the college. I got academic and stuff like that. When he was filling out the paperwork for financial aid, he said, how much does how much your family make? And I said, $4,000. He said, a month? I said, no, a year.
Yeah.
And hey, go ahead and take inflation on that. 4,000 doesn't equate to too much now. And that was after my dad got a raise. Before my sophomore year in the summer, my dad retired early Social Security. He was making at that point $300 a month. So my brother calls me and says, look, I can have you work for the 3 weeks that you're home, work every day. You can make some money. My brother wasn't a normal gasser, wasn't these self-service. We actually pumped. And it was a 9-hour shift. And I did not, it was one of the busiest stations for its size in the entire Pennsylvania. We pumped 250,000 gallons of gas with 4 nozzles every month. So
In the cold. Now, this is
winter. And you've stood out there for 9 hours. You had to make the change. There was no credit cards. It went from 6 to 3 or 3 to 12. But I knew that if I did that, something not good was going to happen. And I ended up not running at all those 3 weeks. The last week, my mother found out that my sister needed surgery and Social Security said they wouldn't pay for it. So she said, I can't give her the surgery. And she said, it's $460. And I hadn't paid my tuition yet. Something told me, I mean, I could have, but I hadn't. I could pay when I went back. And I had the money in my account for the tuition. And it was $450 for tuition. So I said, Mom, she needs that surgery. Take my tuition money. She was like, but you need to go back to school. When I said, Mom, I already had enough credits to graduate. So I didn't go back. And that was probably the biggest mistake I ever made, not going back to that track sheet.
you to graduate, but you still could have run and taken some more courses, taken 12 credits and wow.
Yep. And actually, I was going to take 2 graduate course levels, which I had already got accepted into the graduate program unofficially. Because back then, if you were a graduate student, you couldn't compete.
So you went home for Christmas, living in the cross country house, and everybody expected you to come back.
Yes.
So what happened there?
Everybody understood. I probably could have recovered from that lack of training for those 3 weeks. So about 3 weeks after the semester started, Social Security contacted my mother and said, we made a serious mistake. We should have paid that. And they sent her the money that she had paid for the surgery. If that wouldn't have happened, I would have been going back. I just would have been 3 weeks of not training. The team pulled me on. It wasn't for Kim Burke and his training. And Tim was there in the summer and them pulling me along because they were in a lot better shape than me, keeping me positive. And then even the alumni support, Dan Friedrich, Bob Costello, all of those guys came up all the time on the weekends, especially with Dan's girlfriend at that time and wife now, Susan. They've been married since then. He was from Indiana, so he was up almost every weekend. That team is what kept me going. Same in high school. It was being able to have a social atmosphere, having some friends, kept my grades up because my brothers and sisters, they weren't dumb. They just didn't want to do anything. And I kept my grades up because we didn't have good grades in high school. You couldn't participate in sports. And
Right.
college is just about the same. But the running aspect to me, why it's so important to me was the social aspects of it and what it returned to me as far as giving me the opportunity to be somewhat successful in a career and also the lifetime relationships that you develop.
Your college career ended in 1976. You
Yes.
graduated. What'd you do for running after that?
I wasn't overly competitive. I just enjoyed running and I would go out and do it a little bit, but it wasn't, there were other distractions, other things because of my situation that kept me. I'd run a little bit and then there'd be a race maybe I'd want to do. So I jog for a couple weeks and then go run a race. Nothing real long, usually 5, maybe a 10K and do that. And the job I was in was just something where I was working tons of hours. We were working 60 hours a week, every week. So then I said, what options do I have? I think I want to go back and get a master's degree. So I took the GMATs and then applied back to IUP and talked to Ed and said, Ed, how about the assistant coach to you? Just volunteer, but we'll make it official. And I said, I go back. And then I ran into Bob Costello, and I don't know if he'll admit this, but I highly encouraged him to go back and get a master's degree. And we both ended up getting stipends. So we got our tuition free and we worked 20 hours a week in the business department. And then we trained. That's when I started really running a little bit more. And then I was dumb enough to listen to Bob Costello, who ran all those marathons. And he said, "You want to run a marathon someday?" Yeah, maybe I will. Just to do it. Say, yeah, I think I want to try one. And his question, first thing we goes, how many 20-mile workouts have you done? I said, I said, I ran 15 miles one time in my life. And other than that, I never ran more than 11. And he said, you got to be kidding me. This was from 80 to 81. So in between those 3.5 years, I hadn't really trained. So in 80, I went back in August and started running again. And Trilly was getting his masters. He'd come up every now and then and we'd run together. But we were running with the team. They had some good teams then too. Bob said, we got to go for a 20-mile workout. So we ran 2 or 3 of them before we went and ran our first marathon. And at the 20-mile mark, it was the Harrisburg Marathon. I remember that vividly because you had to run across these bridges across the Susquehanna, and I could see Abbott. He was way up in front of there, and I was yelling at him, Abbott being his nickname, if anybody doesn't know that. But I was yelling at him, and he was laughing back at me. And I ran 6-minute pace exactly. I said, I want to run a 6-minute pace. And every mile was 6 minutes. But I remember at the 20-mile mark, the body said, stop, you're done. I said, no, we got 6 more to go. And I did finish and I had a good time. I ran a couple others with Bob. You know. I went to Boston with him and ran the Boston Marathon. So that was something there. Yeah. When you line up in there, that's the first time I really lined up with a lot of people. We had 15, 17,000. My goal was to beat the first woman and they broke the world record that day. I finished in the top 200. I was proud about that. Going up Heartbreak Hill and I could hear the crowd noise getting closer as all the women, Allison Rowe, Patty Catalano, and the Norwegian, Greta Waitz. The 3 were fastest in the world were coming up, closing in on me, and I could hear them getting closer. I got to the farthest part of the hill, and I was always a good hill runner. So Heartbreak Hill, I got a lead on him, and I couldn't hear it anymore. Coming down the other side, it's 5 miles down the other side of Boston, and I could hear it getting closer again. And I think Allison broke the world record that day and finished 30 seconds behind me. But that was my motivator. You think about motivator, like I know what to beat the first one. We decided to run New York City Marathon, and I did that in 81 in the fall. And then I ran it again in 82. And I ran the Philadelphia Distance Classic and ran nothing great, like a 108. And then it was time for me not to compete anymore. And after that, I did go out and run a 5K here in 18 minutes and stuff like that. But then I started coaching more and doing officiating and work. I had I did have an All-American in junior college, coached at Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I had a kid who finished 15th. I did work with a couple state champs in Pennsylvania. One little girl I worked with won the 400 meters, and then officiating. I really enjoyed that. And I just tried to encourage these kids and say, you're going to college. How's your coaching? You got any good coaches? Well, if you like it and enjoy it, when you don't like, I've always loved to run. I like the camaraderie. I like the teamship. When we went to New York City Marathon a second time, I ran into Mike Higgins. He was working up in Rochester, and he was there with a group. We all ran together, and it was a really nice experience. Eric Wilkinson, Wolfman, I guess is his nickname. He ended up coming to my house and rode up there with us. That to me was what the running was about. The friendships that you met. You were a freshman. And to be honest, I didn't really know you very well because I was only there that one semester. But then later on, got to know you. And that, I think, holds us together. There's a lot of younger guys from IUP, and they even expand that. You run into somebody. That, to me, was what the running of the 70s and how much it meant to me was not the actual running itself per se. It was how it changed and modified my life in particular.
How do you think that is for the kids you've coached? Did you see that the more elite of the athletes that you worked with coaching, were they on their own? Did they have that same kind of team experience?
I think it was a combination. I really pushed the team, and I would individualize their training because, again, it wasn't like the elite schools. You know, the elite schools are going to bring in everybody who's really good and they're already motivated and running great levels. I prided myself in getting these kids to say, let's start where you're at and see how much you improve. Thaddeus Stevens, the technical school, phenomenal. It was founded by Thaddeus Stevens from back in the Civil War days. It was an orphanage at first. Now the state owns it, and it's a fantastic school to go to. Really helps a lot of underprivileged students. So it was great working with them, but we didn't have a big team. And I was working full time. So it wasn't like I was working on campus where I could really recruit anybody I could get in and come out. And we'd have people come out. Never ran before, but I'd like to try and run. Okay. And then we had a couple serious runners. And my son-in-law actually met my daughter and then ended up years later, started dating, and now they're married. And they've been together for 10 years. But he was a sprinter. And I only had 4 guys, and you needed 5 for a team. And I wanted a buffer. So I went to him and another sprinter I had coached in track the year before and said, I want you guys to come out. They said, are you nuts? We're not going to run with Kareem. That guy is nuts the way he runs. I said, no, I want you to finish. I need 5 guys. I said, he's going to win every conference. And the next 2 guys are pretty good. I said, but I need people just to finish other than that. And back to those 2 guys worked, and I had them run totally different workouts. Sometimes we'd run intervals, but they'd run only half of what the others were running. And they got better. These were 100 and 200 guys, and they were running a 5-mile race. And they got down to probably 28 minutes. One kid finished 30 something at states. And then the sprinter, she had the natural talent. You had to get her mind set to win. Hey, don't hold yourself back. Let yourself win. And I told her how to run. It's not where you're at. And the IUP approach about I'd rather be there at the 3-mile mark than not be there at all. I never really agreed with that too often training, but when you're really in a serious race, but I couldn't be there for the state finals, but I was there for the semifinals. I had to leave. I was the assistant coach. So I told her, I said, you're running against the other good girl in the semis. I said, don't worry, top 2, go. I said, make sure you're no lower than second. Don't push it. Nobody's near you. Just finish second. Don't worry about it. Then go in the finals. And that's what she did. She finished second in her heat, and girl beat her by a half second. Went to the finals. She beat the girl by 3/4 of a second. And the girl came up to her and said, I beat you yesterday. And Adrian said, yeah. but that was a semifinal. I was just running hard enough to get into the finals. So that girl had never had that concept brought to her that if I beat somebody in the semifinal, I'm going to beat them in the finals. That's what I tried to teach my kids is you got to know your limitations and you got to run to them. And if you beat me, I'm going to run my best time for you to beat me. And if you beat me, I never got upset about getting beat unless I ran stupid. And when I got beat in any meet, when I was 29th at NCAA, I couldn't win any faster. Now, if it had been another 20 yards longer, I may not have finished. And that was it. I had gone from not being able to run 6-minute pace at the beginning of the summer to running sub fives in the first week in November. So I had nothing. That's all you can do in that amount of time.
You had one season under Ed Fry.
Yes.
Ed Fry's passed on now. Back then, right around that time, he had won the world championship Masters 10K on the track. And I don't know, he lapped the field or something. He was a fantastic runner and he was still running. I'm trying to remember that fall of 76. Was he running with the team at the workouts that one semester with you?
No. He had won the world championships the spring before and he got hurt right after that. And then after I left that spring, he started running again because we were doing a new course. We had never ran that course and we had the first alumni meet ever. Donnie Slusser at his high school had a meet a week before the alumni meet. And I ran that and I don't know, I was maybe 5th, 6th, 7th, and then went to the alumni meet and I ended up winning the alumni meet. But that's why Ed was not training then. Ed gave us the workouts and Benny or Kim Burke was more of a slave driver, if you want to call it that for me. Every day we did this workout. Many of them I was dragging behind him. But no, unfortunately, I didn't have that privilege. I did run against Ed my sophomore year up at Clarion. We didn't have a meet and Canton, there was a race in Canton and Joe Nichols being the way he was, he said, come on, let's all go out there and run that. But I remember we went out there and Jerry Doug and I were up 2nd, 3rd, 4th place, somewhere up there. And Joe wasn't too far behind us. And Joe's screaming at us, don't worry about them. That's Ed Fry. So we got view of him every now and then. I got to see a real good view from a long distance behind me.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy hearing this. Even the people didn't run with you and came after in 76. And some of the guys you compete against, the Edinburgh guys and the other people that'll be tuning into this. You have an amazing life story, one of the most inauspicious beginnings and a great success story and a great upbringing to look back on that no doubt built your character the same way the team experiences did.
I'll close to say, and this doesn't have to be in it, but just for you, when you think about that beginning, it's funny. If we didn't raise it, we had no food. The 1 year we canned 1,500 quarts and pints of food to get us through the winter because we had no electric that year. We almost lost everything. I'm sure you've gone on some wild trips in your life because you chose, and I like to tell people that I lived through some of my good friends' life experiences. I just have little desire to go to some of those places. And you've probably ate some of the exotic stuff, but I've had the privilege of eating groundhog and raccoon, but it did affect me. And I think in a positive way, and there's nothing you can do. I'm lucky my 5 children, I stress to them education. We're training. I'm not big on going to college. You make just as much money as the technical. My son-in-law is making very good money. Now he did get an associate's degree, but in construction, and he's doing very well. So a lot of us have lived good lives.
It just is fascinating how everything goes. Anything can happen. And it's a fascinating twist and turn story.
And that's, the guys on the team, were the support. And that's why I keep bringing that back. And I make sure you get that in there somewhere, because that's really, to me, what made me even remotely a decent runner. I didn't want to let them down. And then the support they gave me as far as not giving up on me is a way to look at it.
Cool.